Hello from the National Opera Center, New York City. I'm Opera America's President and CEO, Mark Skorka, and I hope you're approaching a good holiday break that will be safe, enjoyable, and restorative. Before we launch into a really insightful and uplifting conversation about holiday operas, I want to apologize. We neglected to include any librettists on our panel. We became so enmeshed in coordinating schedules with 5 composers who were scattered across the country and in Europe that we failed to invite librettists to participate in this discussion. To quote Sarah Rule loosely from her beautiful libretto for Eurydice, "For writers, words are their music." I would flip this around to say that music in opera depends on their words. And so it's with great respect for their essential foundational art that I apologize to our librettist colleagues for failing to include them on our panel. Holiday operas, above all, depend on good stories, and you're the storytellers. I apologize.
I'm Laura Lee Everett, Chief Programs Officer for Opera America. And as Mark said, the words and the stories are the essential core to what makes opera such a compelling musical journey for the audience and the artists and performers. We work very hard when planning our programming to be as inclusive and diverse in perspective as possible, but we are human and we made a mistake. To all of our storytelling colleagues and friends, thank you for your candor in reminding us when we are in error and your patience as we continue to change the way we talk about our beloved art form, which would not be possible without your essential artistry, creativity, and voices. My apologies.
Happy December and happy holidays from the National Opera Center. I'm Mark Skorka, President of Opera America, and I'm delighted that you're with us for this very, very special holiday edition of an Opera America webinar. Here at the Opera Center today, there are 3 opera companies auditioning for productions that are scheduled for next season. It's really wonderful to feel our halls filled with the sound of operatic voices. It's very encouraging. Today, we are with some of the most important composers working in opera. We're going to talk about holiday operas. And our perspective is, from a place of feeling a little bit left out. If we look to the ballet world, we see hundreds of productions of the Nutcracker. Every year, they run for weeks. And we certainly know from our colleagues that there are many ballet companies that sustain their operation throughout the year because of the popularity of the Nutcracker. In the theater world, A Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' masterpiece, has sort of taken that place for them, where they run the show for weeks on end. We have not had that good fortune in opera. The Met, along with many other opera companies, have produced Hansel and Gretel, special versions of The Magic Flute or Cenerentola, Cendrillon, other operas that are thought to be perhaps suitable for the holidays and for family audiences. When I was at Chicago Opera Theater, we produced Oliver Knussen's Where the Wild Things Are, along with Peter and the Wolf, which of course had great success at that holiday season. But these works haven't really filled the place for opera. We are still looking for a work or many works that could be seen to be really joyful ways, moving ways, inspiring ways to celebrate the end of one year, the beginning of a new year, and the holidays in December. So we are going to speak to a group of composers today who have been developing a repertoire of holiday operas, to talk to them about the inspiration for their work, some of the challenges of writing a holiday opera, and some of the other elements of adapting very popular pre-existing work to the stage in opera houses. So I'm going to welcome onto the screen now, in alphabetical order, Mark Adamo, Ricky Ian Gordon, Jake Heggie, Jeanine Tesori, and Joel Thompson. I just want to welcome all of you. I'm so happy that you're with us, and I know around the globe, in Europe, across the United States. So thanks for being with us. But I wanted to begin with some personal childhood memories. When I was a kid, the holidays meant that I might get to see The Wizard of Oz on TV. It wasn't available 24/7 then as it is now. And at the holidays, they'd show The Wizard of Oz. And I knew every note of the Nutcracker from a Toscanini NBC symphony recording. And I wore out that recording on the record player. I'm dating myself with technology here, but I wore out that recording listening to it. So the sound of the Nutcracker and knowing that I would get to see the Wizard of Oz. I'm curious to hear, sort of what childhood art memories do you have? I'm going to start with Jake.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for bringing us all together, Mark. So I grew up all those animated Christmas specials. Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Charlie Brown Christmas. Mm-hmm. I looked forward to those every year. And that's when you knew that holiday season had really arrived. And like you said, you couldn't just pull them up anytime. You had to wait and you had to sit in front of it, the TV, and watch. And it was a family experience. So I have really warm memories of those kinds of things. And we weren't theater goers so much as a family when I was little. So it really was centered on what was coming over the TV.
Yeah.
Also The Wizard of Oz.
Jeanine, how about you?
I experienced it the same way as Jake. And I will say that the thing that I really remember, everyone in our family, no one was in theater or actually in music, but there was always a piano that my parents had a piano there. So there was this sense that you had to be there in time. You had to, as Jake was saying, you had to watch the TV when it happened. You didn't have an individual, I'm going to stream it at 3 a.m. It was like at 8 or at this kind of time. And for me, it's always the Vince Guaraldi piano. That was one of the first times that I'd really heard the piano used like that against this like such joyous, those Peanuts characters with this like fantastic groovy music. And I thought, who was that? Why do I feel so happy about this? And why does it feel like it didn't have to be this way, in a kid way? So those are my memories. And also we're Italian, so lots of food.
Lots of food, absolutely. Joe, how about you?
Well, I grew up in the Caribbean, and so my holiday season was quite warm, but I still remember memories of Charlie Brown Christmas special, and Guaraldi soundtrack was definitely influential. But also my family is quite religious, and we went to church and there was lots of Christmas music, and I tended to gravitate towards, excuse me, I tended to gravitate towards the harmony. There's some sort of richer harmony in Christmas music as opposed to the rest of the year. And so I gravitated towards albums like Take Six's Christmas album from the 90s and all those rich a cappella arrangements and harmonies. So yeah, that's my memory of Christmas and holidays.
But did Christmas images, even in a warm climate, still include snow?
It did, and I still have a sense of wonder anytime I see snow, and I definitely tapped into that in my recent opera for sure. I never really saw a real snowfall until November of 2019. So,
wow. Oh, that's fabulous! Yeah. That's fabulous. I love it. Mark, Adamo, how about you? What are some of the childhood memories?
Oh, I would add, or rather echo what Jake and Jeanine said. The only thing that I would add to it was the Bing Crosby, Rosemary Clooney, Danny Kaye, Vera Ellen White Christmas, which was somewhat canonical, if for no other reason than my mother, who had started as a band singer when she was very young, had a rather Clooney-esque timbre. So she's rather identified with that kind of mellow contralto. And then it was really choral singing like Joel at Christmas. I remember the first time I'd ever heard a choir. It was in our church in Willingboro, and the loft was in the back of the, I was going to say the theater, but I'll get to that. Because I had never, generally we used to go to Mass early on and the choir didn't sing. So it was only at a particular Christmas service, I think it must have been noon, that unlike any other service, suddenly there was this, these angelic voices coming at you from the back of the house. And I sometimes tell people that I don't know to this day whether I'm attracted to the religiosity of musical theater or the musical theater and religion, but
Mhm.
it happened in those Christmas services.
But you're so right. You're so right. And Ricky, how about for you?
Well, then when you guys were talking about The Wizard of Oz, I was also thinking about Mary Martin, her Peter Pan. That was always on at Christmas time too, and I loved that. And since I became obsessed with opera at 8 years old, I was obsessed with Amal and the Night Visitors. So I loved that. But also, we were Jewish, and it was sort of sad because right over the bridge, all the Catholics lived and had like Christmas lights and Christmas trees, and we just had those sad, terrible Hanukkah songs. And so I would do things like one year I went to the Village by myself and saw Berlin to Broadway on Christmas, the Kurt Weill Berlin to Broadway.
Mhm.
But yeah, and I agree with everybody. Christmas time is here. I loved that. I loved Charlie Brown Christmas.
So, let's think about what you've all done holiday operas. What are the essential ingredients to you? What are the essential elements that a holiday opera should have as you have worked the material in your own creative thoughts? Jeanine, let me start with you.
Ooh, okay. I'll take it. The holiday opera that I wrote with Sandy McClatchy was it's the Lion, the Unicorn, and Me. And the thing that I really loved about writing, it was based on Jeanette Winterston's book, and Jeanette wrote it in a sort of what she calls a dark night of the soul. And it really comes, so I think, whenever I work on something, that you inherit the initial idea, even if it's an original idea. I feel like everything is an adaptation of the source material. Everything has a center of the earth quality and then concentric circles around it that you inherit. And so we inherited that night from her. And for the transformation or the revelation of coming out of the dark into illumination. And yet it's through a childlike lens because it's the nativity from the donkey's point of view. So from this beast of burden who absolutely was the essential worker of that scene. And so it's an outsider looking in and understanding something. And so for me, it's about revelation, illumination, faith, a childlike wonder. The first time that you see, still today, when the lights go down, it ignites that 7-year-old in me. Or you see Christmas lights turn on for the first time. There is a childlike wonder that I think the world desires to shellac. And I think the holiday is an opportunity for the collective to join together and say, let's reignite it. Let's reignite it with color and light. And for me, it's really about faith.
What a wonderful
holidays.
response. What a wonderful
Really,
response.
the shellac line.
You're welcome.
That was good,
Ricky.
Jeanine.
Yeah, I'm going to come back in a few minutes to what I did find interesting was the through line of the holiday stories that have darkness to them and then overcoming the darkness. And it's just in looking at your works to kind of figure that out. But in terms of just conceptually the elements that you think need to be present in a holiday opera, Joel, let me turn to you.
Yeah, I mean, my Snowy Day is my only opera. It's my first opera, and I'm so glad that it is, because I feel that getting to adapt a children's book gave me even more freedom to explore and get in touch with my inner child. And I feel like that I really, what Jeanine just shared really resonated with me because I got to tap into that sense of wonder. A lot of my previous work looks at the world through, honestly, a lens of fear. And I feel like fear and wonder are two sides of the same coin. And I got to flip the coin and look at the world through Peter's eyes. Still acknowledging that there's a lot of fear as a young Black boy growing up in this world, but really getting to be rooted in wonder. And I feel like that might be the most essential element for a holiday opera.
Mark Adamo, what would you add in here?
Well, when the ambivalence that I always had at Christmas was the buying things part of it, because I mean, when suddenly Christmas will be coming, and now in order to express the love that you feel, you have to buy things, and the shinier the better. And I had so there was an ambivalence in that, loving the glitter and the glamour of the illuminated streets and all of that, but also feeling that there was something, I didn't know whether the things that we were buying were expressing love or substituting for it in a certain way. That's always something that itched when the season would come by. And that's when the opportunity to write this piece came about, Becoming Santa Claus, which is going up in Chicago next week. Was drawn actually not so much to the Christian myth, because that doesn't seem as insistent in our secular culture as secular Christmas is. I mean, that's either your tradition or it isn't, but Santa is everywhere. And so in looking at it, I thought, could you do something that was not only, as you had mentioned about the Nutcracker, the kind of event that would begin in the holiday, but then continue to introduce people to the art form. Something that was about Christmas in an interesting enough way that you would produce it in July and still want to hear it, so that it wasn't dependent on the season. And I just started sketching. I think probably I'm speaking for the whole room that we keep little notebooks, and mine was Christmas opera ? And I had three things really. One was, what if Santa Claus was originally, was the first sort of, what did you get me Christmas brat? Somebody not, and somehow grew into this secular angel of generosity that we think about. And then it occurred to me that the first example of gift giving in, forgive me, in the Christian tradition was the Magi, the giving gifts to the manger. I thought, could you stir them together? Could the kind of secular nativity, if you will, be bounced off the sacred one in some very light-handed way? And so that became the impetus of this piece, that you wanted to both celebrate the glamour of it. I didn't want it to be materialism bad piece, because that seems so naive and so obvious. But could you somehow celebrate the glitter of the season and question it at the same time through that mythic figure?
Ricky, essential ingredients.
Yeah, I was, when we were out, Patrick Summers asked us to write, me and Royce Vavrick, to write this opera for Houston Grand Opera. And it was his favorite childhood movie. So I didn't even know the story. So I went and read it and then watched the movie and gave it to Royce. And it was really fortunate that Patrick brought it to us, because it's very Royce and I are basically children. I mean, like, I feel like I never grew up, and certainly he hasn't. And it is, that story is propelled by grief, which I definitely feel is sort of my wheelhouse. Like, I can always go straight to grief. I know what to do in grief. And the story is about this father, this husband whose wife died when she was giving birth to his little girl, and the grief of her death makes having a Christmas tree impossible for him. And it's cracking through to that, this little girl cracking through that. It was so easy to enter that story. And so I just felt like a child. And I felt like I myself was begging for something in writing that opera. Do you know what I mean? Like something I missed. Because it is, you know, we've been lighting the Hanukkah candles, and of course I'm glad I'm a Jew and I'm proud of it. But there was something about the, you know, the spectacle of Christmas when I was little that was so, it was such an abyss for me. And writing that opera, I felt like one of those Jews writing great Christmas songs. You know what I mean? I just felt like I poured all my Christmas yearning into that opera.
Promise me that we'll dance around the Christmas tree every year. Promise me, while the fire roars its wintry melody, we will be, promise me, waltzing here, while the ornaments shimmer. Snow will fall as the malt cider simmers. You and me, and sleep. Promise me.
Jake, for you, essential ingredients?
I would echo what Joel said. I think there needs to be wonder and a sense, and I also think a sense of magic. I think that's what everyone's talking about, a sense that magical things can happen. One of the things that I also remember from being a kid was singing together. You know, we would go caroling. We weren't a particularly religious family at all. But we would get together with friends and go caroling. And that continued into my college days at UCLA. We would randomly get together and surprise people and go caroling. So it was community, it was a sense of wonder, a sense of possibility and magic. And I think all of the shows that we were talking about that we grew up with, they also have a sense of magic realism, that these magical things can happen, but there's also something big at stake at the heart of it, which is what makes it operatic. That there, you know, it might not be life and death, it might be life and death, but it might be a spiritual life or death, or, you know, something big is at stake. And that's, I think, is what all of us feel makes something operatic, with emotion big enough to fill a space. But that sense of wonder and magic and possibility at the holidays, and that, you know, we don't necessarily have the rest of the year, which is why we look forward to the holidays, sense of community, magic and wonder. I think those are essential elements. And we all love magic realism at the holidays for some reason. I mean, Santa is the big magic realism figure of all, right? Plus angels and things like that. And yet at the holidays, we want to believe we hear them and we see them. And so people dress as them, you know? But I think those are elements that really resonate with what everyone has been saying, as well as the shows that we loved growing up.
Jake, I'm going to stick with you for a second here.
Yeah.
I heard two separate things. One is that Patrick put an idea into Ricky's hands and said, look at this film. And Mark had a page in his notebook that said Christmas opera, you know, idea. Were you saying, I'm going to find a Christmas opera? Or were you watching old movies on TNT and decided, that would make a great Christmas opera? How did you come upon the material? What was the motivation?
Well, Patrick invited me to do a Christmas opera because he was doing a series of them. And he says, but it needs to be something that really sings to you. And I thought, well, Charlie Brown Christmas, probably not. The Grinch, another great, probably not. You know, I was trying to think, what is a story that people come to again and again and again and find new wonder and hope through it? And suddenly, I don't know when it happened, but It's a Wonderful Life popped into my head. And I thought, well, is that even possible? And there definitely is something big and dramatic at stake, because this man is, because of capitalism and the negative impact on his life, drives him to despair, where he's considering on Christmas Eve taking his own life. And yet there's magic and wonder all around him, and he doesn't fit. And he wonders how he missed him. And an angel appears. And I thought, that sounds operatic. It also sounds like magic and magic realism. And it's a story I could connect with deeply. And it's a movie that I have loved. The scary part about it is that the only source material is a great movie. You know, there isn't a book that you pick up that you thought, oh, you could adapt this. No, it's Frank Capra's genius. And it's so dependent on the visual language of film and those indelible performances that I thought, well, we're either going to make this work or it's going to be a huge disaster. But you know, and it took a while. And I brought in Jean Shear, my beloved writing partner, who is brilliant. And he loved that movie. I think he even admits a little too much. He wanted to be so faithful to it. And I said, no, we cannot think of putting the movie on the stage. We have to reinvent it for the stage. There's no reason to take a great movie and try to put it on the stage. We have to find the kernel that speaks to us and find a magical way to do it. And so we did it in Houston, and it was okay, but it needed work. And then we worked on it at IU, and then we finally got it right in San Francisco. And even the production had totally changed around. Everyone reworked everything to make it work. And now I'm really, really happy with it. But it was a long road and a scary road. And I think magic and wonder and holiday opera, that's a tough call, because you are up against Nutcracker, you know? You are. And that's what Patrick was trying to do with these holiday operas. It's like, what can the opera house do while the ballet is doing Nutcracker? So we wanted something that could be done in different sized houses, not necessarily in the opera house because the ballet might be there. You know, it could be done in small house, a big space. So it had to be flexible. It's a huge challenge, huge challenge. But I mean, why else are you in this business if you're not willing to take huge risks, right?
Right. It is opera.
Jeanine,
were you thinking holiday opera, or did you read the book to a niece or a nephew and think, wait, this would make a really good opera? What was the order here?
I wasn't thinking holiday opera at all. Cheska Zambello, that was my second commission from her. She loved this book. She got the rights to it. She wanted something, in a way, it's the programming is to offer. And I know Jeanette and her work, and I love her work. And so I wasn't looking for it. It really came to me. But what I really loved about that idea is, I think holidays it's collectively a time where a lot of the world is in darkness, because the days are long, are short and dark, and it's in many parts of the world, but not all parts of the world, it's cold. So we're closer together, literally, that we can hear each other. And I think the ideas behind it is that you actually take, and I think it's what Mark was saying is interesting, that, the goal, I think, of the holiday is to remind you of what you should be doing every day. Like when we would go to church, and suddenly at Easter is like the big hits. At Easter and at Christmas, and in many other religions, it's of course different, is that when the church gets filled, and that's when, the priest would scold everybody that they're not coming, as opposed to, and I just remember thinking, God, you have such an opportunity not to punish people here, but to invite them of why they should come back, not for just the big hits. Like what they can do in terms of when they leave the parking lot. It always really hit organized religion to me is something I bristle at, but the kernel of faith, and I deeply believe in God, is like that to me is the core center. And I think it's cynicism is the enemy. And I think that the idea that you can give over to something and be very public about believing and about faith and about that childlike wonder. The minute that you stop being able to play or delight, I think, like, you know, we should just go to the bar and give up.
Thank you again. Joel, does Patrick have a third iron in the fire here? Did Patrick come to you with the idea?
Well, actually, Julia Bullock came to him, and it was really her idea to turn Snowy Day into an opera. But then I met him at Aspen, and he heard one of my orchestral pieces, and then I got attached to the project. And I definitely empathize with the main character, Peter, in the snow. I hadn't really experienced a real snowfall when I said yes to write this. So I was definitely tapping into an autobiographical sense of wonder as it relates to snow as well. So that's how the idea came to be.
And of course, you know, the holidays come just when the first snowfall of the year is happening. And I think we all are touched by, in the northern part of the Northern Hemisphere, we are all touched when that first snowfall of the year happens right around this time, that wonder. Now, Mark Adamo, you know, I come to you last in this sequence because you did not base your opera on, you know, pre-existing material. And, you know, so were you thinking, I want to do a holiday opera for years, for months? How did you get started in down this path?
Well, it happened when I was composer in residence at City Opera, and I was seeing two singers for whom ultimately I would write roles, one of them in this piece, in a production, James Robinson's production of Hansel and Gretel. And it was one of the more terrifying scenes of the opera. And Paul was there, Paul Kellogg, the producer who had appointed me. And I just turned to him idly and said, you know, the ballet has the Nutcracker. And the closest thing that we have in the opera house is this story of abandonment and cannibalism to a neo-Wagnerian score.
Yes.
Really? How did that happen? And I actually learned later in my research that weirdly, it had been premiered as a song cycle privately in Humperdinck's house on Christmas Eve. And then it became an opera thereafter. So it was always planned to be a Christmas thing, which is still a bewildering choice, but let that pass. But that's when I thought, I wonder if you could do something that would function, as I said earlier, in that cultural event the way the Nutcracker does. I mean, how many dancers do we know who had no interest in or knowledge of ballet, and then they were taken, you know, to the Christmas event and suddenly realized, can dance do that? You know, I mean, more dancers discovered their calling from the Nutcracker than, say, through Giselle. And I thought, wouldn't it be something if we could do that kind of thing that you would bring also, you know, all sorts of audiences to, you know, not simply the youngest ones. You would come for the holiday element and then realize, if that's opera, if that's what opera can do, well, you know, then either as an artist or as an audience member, I want in. And again, that's when the Christmas opera notebook happened. And the other element, I thought, well, if you're going to do something glamorous, maybe I can get to do something that I've longed to do and have never been able to do in the previous three pieces, which is, could I write really thoroughgoing melismatic roles? You know, could I write sort of American Handel, if you like? I've always been thinking that should be possible. We can't always be stuck in syllabism, but it never quite happened, with a vanishingly few exceptions to the previous pieces. And then I thought, elves sing in coloratura. You know, if Titania can sing in coloratura in Midsummer Night's Dream, I can probably find that. So I thought that's going to give me one sense of it. And then the other two elements were, as I mentioned, what if the big subject, the ache, if you will, is the ambivalence about gift giving? That, you know, is this the real thing, or is this the substitute, the shiny substitute for the real thing? Which led me to the adolescent, you know, the bratty kind of Prince Claus who grows into something else. And then the Magi became the third element, but that's all I had. And then I was in Dallas because Sasha Cook, who was going to open in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, wanted to meet with me before rehearsals began. And the only time that we could meet was in Dallas. She just opened the Aspirin Papers, and I met with Keith Cerny, not with any particular project, but I just had these three ideas. And he said, well, are you working on anything at the moment? And I said, well, at the moment, I'm rather involved rewriting the New Testament, but I have this half-baked idea for this Christmas thing. And he said, talk to me afterwards. Talk to me after you open the show in San Francisco. And then he said, we'd be very interested in this. And that's when I started to develop it in earnest.
Now, I wanted to turn to Jake and to Ricky here, and then I'm going to go to Joel. So you had Jimmy Stewart to contend with. How do you treat something that is iconic? To avoid it completely, to embrace it and unpack it. So how do you adapt something that is iconic?
Well, like I said, this was the big challenge of this, that it only exists as people know it, as with Jimmy Stewart. And so you start thinking, well, who do I know? What singing actor do I know who could inhabit that role with as much heart without imitating it, but recreating it and making it their own? Like I said, there's no point in putting a movie on the stage. It exists so perfectly in that realm that to try to find a new incarnation of it that would work. So we started thinking, like, would it be a baritone? Would it be a bass baritone? Would it be a lyric baritone? And I thought, no, it's got to be a tenor. It has to be someone whose voice reflects hope and optimism, and then that goes away. And in that moment, we both looked at each other and it has to be Bill Burden. We were huge fans of Bill Burden. And so it became a role that we thought, okay, Bill Burden is our George Bailey. Now we can write it, because once you know who you're writing for, things become so much clearer. So once we knew that was our George Bailey, and then this person was cast in that role, then it started to become clear, and we could think of it as this stage piece rather than being haunted by this brilliant movie. But you have to reinvent it. And part of that is the collaboration, the people that you're working with, the director, the designer, especially the librettist, and the people that you're writing for, who are going to make this come to life on the stage. I find great inspiration in those performers. And so once we had the original cast, it was just so clear that we didn't risk having to worry that people were going to expect the movie. We could set the terms of how we were going to tell the story on the stage right away. And, if you do that clearly, if you set those terms clearly for the audience, they will go with you. It's if they're wondering how you're going to tell it, that leaves them a little bit behind. The one thing we did have in our favor, it is a story that most people know. So they're like, oh yeah, I know the story. Now, how the hell are they going to do that in an opera? That's not a bad place to start. So, but it was having brilliant collaborators and especially performers that really inspired us to write a new way. And if you do it with clarity and that specific, then it can become something so broad that other people can do it, and other directors and designers can find a way to do it too. But it was a challenge.
And I'm gonna see the world. I don't have a choice. It's beyond what I want, what I dream. This is who I am, Mary. An adventurer, an explorer, an inventor. And I'm going to invent a life bigger than anything Bedford Falls has ever seen.
I mean, you had Jimmy Stewart, and Ricky, you had Jason Robard. So how did you manage, how did you think through the adaptation? Because you again had something that was iconic.
So, all right, here's the thing, is that Jake was dealing with a gigantic, iconic, worldwide, but I never thought when I watched The House Without a Christmas Tree that a lot of people had seen it. So I mean, in some ways, Mark, when your question makes me think more of The Grapes of Wrath, feeling like I'm setting the world's favorite book to music, and on opening night at 5 o'clock when everyone's having dinner, and you're thinking like, at 11:30 tonight, my career will either be over or moving forward. But with The House Without a Christmas Tree, I didn't feel any pressure to make those people. I just felt like I'm going to make my own people. I also think too, like, I'm sure Jake would concur, but the minute you have someone singing, the minute you're setting them to music, they become their own beast entirely. Do you know what I mean? I didn't feel trapped by Henry Fonda or, characters become, at least for me, they become real inside of you. And then they start singing and they become human beings you have created. Like everything else drifts away, at least in my experience.
I think with Joel and with Jeanine, it's an issue of language, of the author's language. So Joel and I found out a fact here that the New York Public Library reports that Snowy Day is the most checked out book in the history of the library, which is remarkable. But with very sparse language and unique language. So how did you adapt for the language?
Yes, and it's also a book in which, I mean, from one sort of cynical perspective, nothing really happens, and something needs to happen on the opera stage. So I think Andrea Davis Pinkney and I really relied on her brilliance. She decided to look at the rest of the Ezra Jack Keats canon of books centered around Peter and his family and his neighborhood. And we decided to bring some of those characters into the plot so that there would be some sort of friction and conflict that needed to be resolved. There's the bullies with the snowballs, the snowball fight, and Peter can't play with them. And but yeah, I feel like we had to when dealing with such a classic book from 1962, where everyone has their own takeaway from this very simple story, I think what Jake said really resonated with me, of being very specific about the kernel, the idea that we wanted to bring to the stage. And in only doing that, I hope we get to some sort of universal thing. But we didn't try to please everybody. We really just tried to take what we got from the book and bring it to life through music on the stage.
And Jeanine, for you, around the language, because you said you admired Winterson's work, and the language is a beautiful language that isn't always singable because it doesn't necessarily leave room for the music. How did you adapt the language so that it suited you and your composition?
Well, Sandy and I, Sandy was the greatest, and I think he also had exhibited a great sense of play with, wordplay, and and Jeanette has a very similar, she's really exuberant, and as was Sandy. For me, the operas that I write always have they're really theater operas. Like, it's just I can't write in any other way. And so for me, it was that we centered on, the lead character is in a way an angel played by a young soprano, but the part that we really wanted the audience to feel for was the donkey, and the way that he looked at this event. And in a sense, it could be seen as, yes, it's the nativity, but it was about the secular, an aspect of, the people who just get ignored at these big events, the cater waiters of life who make things work and don't ever get the Klieg light shown on them. And so we really wanted to have the play of all of these characters, these really hilarious, delightful characters that Jeanette created, and people coming out of pots, and the landscape of people selling things, and the innkeeper, and all of those, and at the real sense to center it at the person who it's never about, the people who don't get to be the protagonist. And so it was playing with that childlike, that language of play, and also the sincerity and the gravitas of people who are ignored.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have to go back and read the book.
Oh yeah.
You know, when I think of, you know, Mark, I remember your piece. I was at the first performance in Dallas, and you know, there's one audience which is children.
Mhm.
There's another audience that is family, and there's another audience that's adults. And I found that your opera, because I want to ask about which audience are you writing for, and how do you write for all three, or to make your choices. I found that as an adult, I found your libretto really funny, and it was funny in a way that only an adult would really understand, even though I think a child would be swept away by, you know, the magic of the piece. So how do you write on all of those levels if you choose to do so, or how do you decide how to focus?
Well, once you have a tween protagonist, I think that solves a lot of the problems for you. If you're going to write someone who is simply human while 12, you know, that will kind of make the piece intelligible to people who are about 12. But that was actually a question that came up in the context of the production, because very early on, Keith said, well, we started using the language of a children's opera, and I raised a tiny hand and said, I don't know if I can do that entirely, because I don't know enough really about how children listen specifically differently as opposed to adults. So I think what I can do is maybe a Pixar movie that is trying to do exactly what you had said, that kind of narratively is intelligible to children, but there are other dynamics that are at work in it that, you know, for older audiences.
Mm-hmm.
And he said go, which is how that worked.
Mm-hmm.
But it did become, I guess, one of the things that also solved that is the deeper that I dug into the story, the more it really seemed to be a story about parents and children. You know, it was much more about people who wanted either to be or to have perfect parents and could not, and how gift giving either expressed the love you felt or substituted for it when you didn't. And I thought just that in and of itself as a narrative is going to be understandable to people of various ages, because it's about the relationship of a child to parents and vice versa. So if I get that clear, maybe I'm not going to have to worry about the tone per se,
Mm-hmm.
which is how
Mm-hmm.
it worked.
Mm-hmm. Jeanine, I see you nodding in agreement there. You know, children, families, adults, how do you work that as the creator?
I mean, my life really began when I had my daughter, and I remember I think, you know, as a woman in music, you're trying to deny you have a uterus, and then all of a sudden you can't deny it. I went into one of my orchestral rehearsals with a baby strapped in one of those baby bongy things, and I thought, well, here goes, you know. And it was an incredible turning point to just say, yeah, you know, authentically, this is who I am. I have a kid. And I think that was the start of a great freedom that cracked open for me to see the world. That's when I first wrote 12th Night at Lincoln Center. And there wasn't there's a liberation, I think, that happened to see the world alongside her, to how she listened to things and learn alongside her, to sort of give what I didn't get as a kid, which was great. And the thing that we forget, I think, about kids is how wise they are. Yes, they will kick the chair if they're bored. I call it, you know, it's a real test when you put it in front of, when they kick the chair, like Jeffrey Katzenberg, when I worked with him, used to say like, oh, kids love real estate. It's just like they get bored at a certain amount of exposition. They need their senses to be enlightened in the way that, you know, Nutcracker, when you think about it, the snow and the growing tree, we forget about the visuals. And the proscenium of opera, how we can say to these kids, when we did the Lion Unicorn, the singers came out, and really the story is based on an angel who interviews these animals, and one is a unicorn, it's colored to a soprano, and she doesn't get the part. And the lion, who's this, incredible man, all of the costuming, she doesn't get the part. The donkey gets the part, this lowly donkey to get the part of carrying, after interviewing. And it's what Sandy wrote was very funny. But afterwards, there was a queue of children as the singers with their incredible costumes and them looking up to them. And I thought, oh, that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the music. They're going to remember meeting this work and the visuals of it, because all of the slapstick that would happen and they would just sort of scream with delight. They're not going out and buying a CD of my work. They're going to remember the experience of it. And that was quite wonderful.
The story of The Lion, the Unicorn, and Me is the story of the animal community who decide that there must be a representative to escort Mary to the manger for the nativity. So an angel organizes the whole shebang, and the animal community has elected a lion, a unicorn, and a donkey as their possible contestants. I figured it's a show marketed towards kids. We need to make it really lush and really vivid. I was thinking about things that I would want to see as a kid, things that would captivate my attention. The main characters are the lion, the unicorn, and the donkey, of course, and they all have really specific looks. The unicorn I took straight off of runway fashion and put in a little bit of Lady Gaga, but also a little bit of vintage Adam Ant. She has a mohawk as her mane. Her horn is made out of her hair that's twisted up into a wire, and there's glitter and gold all over her. Contrasting with her is the lion, who is very regal, but he's very wild at the same time. So he has lots of manipulated animal prints and furs and really dense bullion gold. To contrast with both of them is the donkey, who is kind of like the janitor in this whole scenario. His tail is made out of a mop. He's really sad looking. He's got distressed coveralls, and his palette is much more neutral and much more donkey-like. Once you figure out who the artist is, you can tailor things to them. Like, for instance, Solomon Howard is our lion, and he's a very tall, very regally carried gentleman. So I took my inspiration for the lion being in a uniform from his own regal posture. Some unique things about the puppets for the show is that they're mostly made out of soft parts. So unlike some different styles of puppetry, most of the animals' bodies are made up of fabric draped over their human operators. For instance, the camel, his two humps are made up of his operators inside. Working with the team at WNO is amazing. They're fabulously talented artists, and they can turn a drawing into a reality in ways that are just stunning. I wanted there to be a sense of inspiration from the regular world, so that a kid can come see the show and see these really imaginative things and then go out in their real world and think about that guy on the bus that could totally be a hippopotamus. When kids come to see this show, I hope that they're blown away by just the cool things that are on stage. But more importantly, I hope that they really get the message that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do, it's how you do it. And perseverance is key.
And what I'm also learning is that coloraturas are a part of holiday operas. I think it's the coloratura comeback. Joel, how about for you in thinking about the different levels of audience and trying to make it work for all?
Yeah, I think I took the approach of writing for myself. I felt like I needed to get in touch with my inner child so that it could be accessible to other children. And then also, being able to write for myself as an adult as well. I thought about my family and other families who have not really interacted with this art form of opera that I've fallen in love with, and what would they need to see, what would they need to hear in order to go through that same process of falling in love with this. And I tried to create that so that we can expand who gets seen on stage and also who gets to listen to what's on stage. That was at the forefront of my mind in the creative process, for sure.
Ricky, I see you nodding in agreement about sort of writing for yourself, writing for the child within you. How do you make it appeal at all levels?
Well, first, I just want to say that you guys are all so articulate. It's really fun listening to you. I feel like proud to be a part of this community. As far as I really feel like that first of all, the child thing, that making it appeal to children, it's like I said, I feel like a child, and I am the child that kicks the chair when I'm bored. And so the idea of event and activity and beauty on the stage is, I get that you have to like appeal to the eye of the child a lot. But then the adult thing, that's what I wondered about because there is this deep vein of grief in House Under the Christmas Tree. But a lot of kids came and they seemed to really like it. And I think that's because there were so many kids on stage in the opera that are responding to the adults who are in this state of grief, that it didn't separate the adults from the children, that it was all, the characters were all wound up. And Alan Moyer, it was such a beautiful set. It was hard because it was when Houston had their huge flood. And instead of our opera being done at the Cullen Theater, it was done in like, at the Javits Center of Houston. And though they made a theater, it still was like, where are we? You know what I mean? But it was it's very fulfilling to do, I think, I mean, I would do 10 more Christmas operas. I would, because appealing to human beings at that time of the year, when people are so full in their feelings, emotions run high. And I felt it was electric to make a Christmas opera. I want to do like more.
Jake, any more suggestions about making it work across all audience levels?
Well, I mean, everyone's been, like Ricky said, everyone's been so articulate. I think, you have to find a story that really speaks to you as a creative artist. And that's first and foremost. And if it sings to you, it's going to sing to every part of you, the adult, the child, everything. And no one's going to like everything. There isn't just one audience for every piece. My God, I know people who don't like Mozart. I'm like, really? You've listened to all Mozart and you don't like Mozart? They've just decided. And so there's going to be people that love it and people that don't. And so you have to write it so that it speaks to you and that you feel gratified by it. And then it will find its audience or it won't. I think you can't pander to children. They can recognize when that's happening. I do think, like Jeanine said, in a different way, but audiences, especially today, for a new piece, they listen with their eyes. And if something feels magical, then they might hear your score. And if it seems like it works for the characters and for the world that you've created, then they might hear the music and the score. They're not going to remember the score necessarily, but they might hear it. But if what's happening on the stage is confusing or doesn't work, they're not going to have a good experience. And that's whether you're an adult or a child. So it's a tall order. I don't think you can write, something that's going to appeal to adults and children. You just have to write a story that you believe in and characters that you really believe in, and hope that the right audience finds it and the right producers, and that you have the right design team so that people can actually experience the piece as you imagined it. I mean, I'm sure we've all had productions in our past where we're like, oh no, this is going to be a disaster because this does not work visually at all. So people aren't going to understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's too late. But that, you really have to write from your heart first, and what speaks to you and moves you and thrills you. And from there, let the characters emerge, work with your collaborator, find the people that are going to make it happen, and then let it blossom from there, and hope that, what moved you is going to move an audience. But I don't think you can predict which audience is going to love it. That's just, that's my feeling.
Ricky said that he would love to do more holiday operas. Do others of you share that? You know, is it a subgenre that you'd like to work with some more, Jake?
I actually did. I wrote this 3-character opera called 3 Decembers, which is about a family that's struggling with each other over a period of 3 holiday periods in 10 years apart. And it's interesting that it's 3 Decembers. It's set at that holiday time, but it is not a Christmas opera. And it gets done many different times of the year, and yet that's its core. So I feel like I've already done 2 in a way. And if another really cool story comes along that like makes all my hair stand up and sets my imagination on fire, where I feel the music and like I feel like I have to do that, absolutely, I will do another one. It's a really special thing, and like I said, I love magic realism. I love the sense of wonder, the sense of anticipation, of possibility, of something larger than us that brings us together in this unique way. So yeah, I find that very appealing. Whether that's a Christmas opera or not, I don't know.
Well said, Jeanine. Do you, without being specific, do you have any other favorite stories that you think, you know, that's another holiday opera waiting to happen?
You know, I don't. I'm working on the Grounded for the Met right now, and I find opera. I don't know how everybody feels. I find it the most difficult and the loneliest writing experience. I love it, but I'm not quite. I think this might be my last one. You know, and I'm going to continue to write, but I find that there's something so solitary about it for it taking so long. And I think because I was not raised in theater, I was, you know, played field hockey when I was young, but I think the theatrical experience of the back and forth of community, but woof, you know, this past year of writing Grounded, and I think, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic, I don't know if I can go into the opera cave anymore. So maybe I love going, and I will look forward to what everybody is writing on this panel. But I think this will be so I'm announcing my retirement, Mark. And that's what I'm saying.
You know, I just wanted to say, Jeanine, that Verdi thought Aida would be his last opera, but then he pulled Otello out of one sleeve and Falstaff out of the other. So, you know, you can take a pause.
Verdi. But thank you.
We'll give you an intermission.
Okay.
You know, I'm so inspired by all of you, and I agree with Ricky. What incredible articulate artists. I had an early opportunity to ask Santa for some things, and I asked Santa for the end of COVID as we know it, and for normal seasons next season. And I asked for Santa that we can be brought together the way your operas strive to bring us together, and to enable all of us to celebrate year-round the child within, and to recognize that there is always wonder right around the corner if we look for it. I can't wait to see your operas occupy our theaters from November through December in seasons to come. It's wonderful to be able to speak to you and to wish you my heartfelt thanks and best wishes for 2022. I can't wait to see each of you in person. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank
you all.
Everyone.
Smarty pants.
Best Thursday ever.
It's
Bye for
good.
now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.